Black history is my history.
Black history is our history.
Black history is my history.
Black history is my history.
Black history is our history.
Black history is my history.
Black history is our history. Black history is my history. Black history is our history. Period.
Black history is my history.
Black history is my history.
Black history is my history at the Avery Research Center.
Black history is my history at Avery Research Center.
Learn more about your Black history at the Avery Research Center opening soon.
Low Country, the Juneteenth Festival celebrating Black excellence is here June 14th through the 20th. Saturday, June 19th, it's Tony, Raheem Devon, Lacey, Lebrato, and more now at the Jenkins Institute. Go to lowcountryjuneteenthweek.com or follow us at Low Country Juneteenth Week.
I am because you are is a famous African proverb, which basically means we are all connected. And with that said, I am Rhonda McKnight. I'm your moderator for this evening's session, and I will be bringing on my esteemed panel of guests to discuss the topic of efficacy and Black storytelling. We will begin with Cleo Scott Brown. Oh, I'm not on yet. Oh, I am. Sorry. Hello, Cleo. Welcome.
Thank you. So glad to have the opportunity to be here today.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and introduce yourself because I'm sure that no one can do that better than you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Cleo Scott Brown. I am a local author living in Goose Creek. I am the author of two books. One is Witness to the Truth, and that is published by the University of South Carolina Press, and that covers about 100 years of history of a small town where no Black people were allowed to vote, and it was an almost all Black town. And my second book is Raceology 101, which is a National Federation of Press Women first place winner in nonfiction. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. And next we will have D.M. Brockington.
Hey, Rhonda. Hey, Cleo. Thank you for having me. I'm Juana D.M. Brockington, and I write women's contemporary fiction as well as paranormal and urban fantasy for the older crowd. And all of my main characters are 30 to 40 plus. I have a witch series, actually two, the Millennial Witch series and the Charleston Supernaturals. And I have a Daywalker series that's launched. And the first book is called The Mark. So I love urban fantasy, speculative fiction, and anything with Black women and their magic.
Awesome. Okay, welcome, Duana. And next we will have Samuel Bellamy Jr.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the invite. Happy to be here. Samuel Bellamy, I'm the author of two books, a children's activity book called Hidden Gems, and a self-help book called Just Me, Myself, and I. It's all about mastering your mindset. And I'm happy to be here with you guys tonight.
Okay, awesome. Welcome. Next on our panel is Preslasa Williams.
Hello, everyone. My name is Preslasa Williams. I am an author of contemporary romance and women's fiction with an Afro-Filipina twist. And my most recent release just came out on June 1st, and it's called A Low Country Bride. It's a heartwarming romance that is set in Charleston, and I'm happy to be here.
And our last member of our panel is Savannah Frierson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Savannah J. Frierson. I am also a local author here based out of North Charleston. I also work at the Avery Research Center, so I'm glad to be here. I have been writing published since 2007, mostly independently published, and I write women's fiction and romance, contemporary, historical, and a smattering of paranormal. So I'm very excited to be here tonight.
Okay, so we've got a great panel. And I guess all Black Lives Matter, so I should introduce myself. I am Rhonda McKnight. I'm the author of 20 novels, women's fiction, and romance, mostly inspirational and Christian. And so with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Storytelling is, ancient and universal. And without it, we would lose history. We would not have the context for just how to move and be in our existence, in our very existence. It transcends ethnicity, gender, borders, language. Storytelling is magic. And so with that said, I think the discussion around Black efficacy in Black storytelling is very timely for this Juneteenth week. So let's talk about how storytelling, particularly the ability to share our individual bodies of work, impact us as a culture at large. You want to take that first?
I'll take a stab at it. So I think of how one of the major kind of rules that enslaved people especially were not allowed to do was read and therefore get and learn how to write. So the fact that we could not document our stories in a way that had in some ways a tangible documentation, which is so important in this country and in this Western culture, is very unfortunate in a lot of ways. However, we always had the oral storytelling tradition. So even though we did not have access to the tangible, pen and paper, so to speak, we also had the opportunity to make sure that we told our stories to each other and pass those stories down. But also think of, how the very first forays we had into the written narrative were, slave narratives, for lack of a better term, or ways to show how our lives or how their lives impacted how this country saw itself. So, you say you're the land of the free and home of the brave, but you have a whole swath of people who are neither. So, Black storytelling has always been kind of a mirror of how we should be, how we claim we are and we're not, and how, in a way, how we would want to be for the future, the best versions of ourselves.
I'd like to take a stab at that. Well, my book covers about 100 years of history. And what I discovered doing the research was how much we didn't know about ourselves, how much we didn't know about, I think, the powerfulness of the ancestors and what they went through and what they were able to accomplish with so little. And so my father had me like late in life. So my dad was born in 1901 and he was raised by people born in the 1840s. And so when I was recording what he had to say and what he had to share, he's telling stories from people who actually lived during slavery times. And so if he had not told us that, and if we had not had like a lot of information in the Civil War Black soldiers manuscripts from those files, all that information would have been lost. And we would not have known how powerful they were and how they took on the government and President Roosevelt in the 30s and got land, and how they had national protests, and how they had the National Associated Press, and how all the Black people worked together and organized and made things happen. So I think when we record or even read things from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, we get to understand better where we are now, and it makes us understand just how powerful we are.
Okay, well said, Cleo. I agree with that. And I'm going to ask if Samuel, if you share your thoughts on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I agree with what the other panelists have said, and I kind of echo that same sentiment that, you know, because reading and writing was so forbidden, not only in policy, but in practice. Like, you could literally be put to death for doing it. But just knowing and understanding that, you know, our ancestors, they knew that the story had to be told. I think it was, you know, a great testament to their human spirit that kind of ushered in this practice, letting people know that, you know, a lot of times the things that we go through, people wouldn't believe unless it was written down. So I think the art of storytelling, you know, is so prevalent today. And, you know, I'm just really excited to be a part of it, to be, you know, a part of this long history of people owning their voice. And I think it's important that we continue that practice. So it's always been important. It will continue to be important. And as long as people live, it's going to be our duty to keep that practice going.
Absolutely. Okay, I know for myself, I am a homeschool mom, and so I have a 15-year-old son, and we're studying Black history. It's a big part of our whole entire homeschool experience. And you know, it wasn't that long ago that he asked me, how do we even, if our people couldn't read or write, how do we have these books? You know, specifically, like Frederick Douglass had a best-selling book back in his day, back in the 60s, and so the 1860s. And so, you know, I explained to him that, you know, we have always persevered as a people. You know, he's learned about griots, the legacy of the griot. But I agree, the written word is kind of like you said, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. But for us as a people, I think that we have, we know the power of owning our voices and owning our stories. And we know that our stories are the springboard for us to continue to be strong as a people, to move forward as a people. And so with that, I'd like to bring in Preslesa, and I'd like to know your thoughts around this topic, particularly in writing a story that is set in the Low Country, where we have so much rich culture and history as a Black people.
So I write romance, and I like to say that I write sweet love stories that don't shy away from hard topics. One of my things that I love to do as a writer is to take Black people, Black and brown people, and put them in these idyllic settings for the sweet romance genre, and give them their happily ever after and their healing, while also acknowledging some of the issues and concerns and problems that face Black and brown communities. So when I decided to set this story in particular, this sweet love story in particular, in the Low Country, there was no way that I could ignore the Black history of Charleston. As you probably all know, the port of Charleston was one of the major slave ports during the transatlantic slave trade, one of the biggest ones. And so a lot of the present day African-American people, their ancestors came through and entered into the United States through that port. And so there is a rich and complicated history in Charleston. And so, for example, in this book, I reference that history. My characters acknowledge that history, but in the same way, at the same time that they're acknowledging it, that they're discussing it, that they're coming to grips with it through their own respective storylines, I'm also healing them through it. And so in doing that, I hope to heal the reader, whoever that reader is that's encountering that story and may have those same concerns or struggles or questions about their own place in the world and in America specifically. So that's how I see it.
Okay, and that's powerful because we can't have healing without history. We can't have healing without context. So, even within romance, and I'm going to talk about genre a little, there is the power to reach out and touch the soul of the reader and in that way. So my next question is, I know that I always say that we're hardwired for story, I don't care if a person is, you can capture the attention of a child, someone who's busy. You can capture the attention of someone who's dying with a story. And so with that said, I always think about what the Western canon of literature, which is largely white and largely white male. Where do you think that we fit in with respect to our ability to get our stories out in the mainstream? Like, what are in your thoughts, what are the barriers? What are some ways that we, as storytellers, can bring our voices to the diaspora outside of the traditional systems? And I'm going to ask Cleo if she would share her thoughts about that.
Well, it is difficult just getting your material out into to a much larger audience, or shall I say a broader base. But I had an advantage of my book being published by the University of South Carolina Press, and that automatically got it into the catalogs and going to all the universities in the country. It got it reviewed in, major newspapers. And so it gave the book credibility as a historical document. And that way, you can find it in most college libraries. Fort Dorchester used it in the classroom for a period of time. So I did get that advantage because of who my publisher was. And like I say, it's a historical account, so that makes other people not question whether it's accurate or not, because it's checked out by other historians before it goes out. So I mean, you just have to know a lot of people who know a lot of people who know a lot of people. And what I found is you're talking to one person, and next thing you know, they've connected you with another group that connects you with another group. And so that's the main way I've learned to do things, is just be friendly and meet people. And you never know who you're talking to.
Okay, all right. And so, and that works well with history and nonfiction. Samuel, did you want to share your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges of getting, your book out there, your manuscript, whatever the genre, I think the biggest challenge is that we have a lot of writers with really great stories that refuse to put a pen to paper. There are so many stories that are waiting to be written. People think that, somebody's already written about this, or there's a book already about this. So I actually think there's not enough, writers, being published, and there's not enough people who value their voice enough to, go through that process. The other part of it is I think we're still overcoming that stigma that Black people don't read. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We're avid readers. We're voracious readers of all genres. I mean, just on this panel here, there are at least 4 or 5 different genres represented, and we're such a small percentage of the authors in Charleston alone. So I think overcoming some of those stigmas, and then I also think, in a larger sense, I think there's a segment of the population that doesn't want us to be published. They don't want our voice out there, because then, like Miss Cleo mentioned with her book, it's historical fact. The more historical fact that she puts out there that's checked by other credible sources, the more reckoning other people who have written books have to come to grips with. Well, maybe their facts isn't all right. And I think a lot of people don't want to have that conversation either. So I think there's a couple of different things. Those are just a couple that I think is most prevalent.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. And I think there's a lot of not wanting to have the difficult conversations that are tied to our past here in this country. We know that could be a whole nother panel discussion. But I'd like to ask Dewana, one of our fiction authors, to chime in on her thoughts about this topic.
So I think it's important that we press the issue to tell our stories, because Charleston is a prime example. My mother was born and raised here, and my roots are here. But when you hear the history of Charleston, it's about these plantations and all of these white people who did these things, and not about the Black folks who made it happen for them, who built the buildings, paved the sidewalks, all the things. And so as a fiction writer, all of my stories are set here in Charleston. This is my home. This is about reclaiming my space. And also about telling the other side of the story. Not that we do know that the mainstream stories are often not accurate, and often because they leave out a whole portion or a whole segment of the population. We're that segment of the population. And so it's important for us to write our stories so that folks understand yes, and this happened, but also all of these things that you didn't know about, like Cleo said, have also happened, have also contributed to shaping our city and making us who we are. And so for me as a writer, it was really important to center my stories in the South, but in Charleston in particular, because I had spent a lot of time in my 20s running away from Charleston because it was a small city and all the things. But as I got older and more mature and understood the need for connection and roots, then I was coming back home to do that and realizing that who I am wasn't well represented in the stories about this place. And so this is just an effort on my part to make sure that people know we were here too. We are part of the narrative. We are inserting ourselves back into the narrative.
Absolutely. And there has been the erasure, whether it's been intentional or unintentional, it doesn't matter, it's there. So I'd like to ask you, Savannah, if you would share your thoughts about the power of our voice in romance.
Well, if you look at just media and you see who gets to be loved and who gets to be loving, is very often not people of color, and particularly not Black people, and specifically not Black women. And I can say, looking back, the 90s I was very spoiled in terms of television and storytelling, because I got to see all of that in various different ways with, Living Single and Martin and Family Matters and Hanging with Mr. Cooper and all of Moesha. I got to see all ages all types of families, found families, biological families, all of that. I was spoiled. In my literature, however, that was a little dry, but I was also a little young, so I didn't know where I was looking yet. But I do remember wanting to see people who looked like me being loved and loving other people. And it wasn't until I got older and I was able to discover, Beverly Jenkins and Brenda Jackson and Rochelle Allers and Frances Ray. And I inhaled those books. And I decided that I wanted to write those stories too. I wanted to write them from the perspective of, younger people who maybe have a little bit more of a diverse kind of worldview, or not even a worldview, but have more exposure to other people than maybe our parents had because of law or because of just de facto, that's just not what we do here. And so to explore what does love look like for, young people or younger people or, millennial people or Gen Z people, what does that look like? How do we diversify that? How do we say that not that is valid, but that you are here and you are seen and you are present? And that is what I think we're seeing now with, especially within Black romance. We're seeing far more diversity in terms of sexuality, gender expression, class even, because I think it's romance tends to be in a lot of ways holding up a mirror of an ideal, and that ideal might not be everybody's ideal. So it's exciting that we're starting to have a diversity of what ideal is. And I think between Black voices, Black women especially, sharing that diversity, and because we have now indie publishing giving us the space to do that, and we don't have to just rely on traditional publishing and those traditional gatekeepers saying, we're not sure if this audience will like it. And it's like, well, I'm not writing for that audience. I'm writing for this audience. This audience has money. This audience has voracious readers. This audience deserves to be served, and I'm here to serve them. And now that, indie publishing has disrupted traditional publishing, I think in a great way, so that we're allowed to have different types of romances. We can have the paranormals. We can have the sweet romances. We can have the menage a trois romances and polyamorous romances. We can have the LGBTQA plus romances. We can have all of that. And we can show Blackness and Black love in the full breadth that we experience it. And it's a wonderful thing.
My own experience as a writer, as a Christian fiction writer. When I started writing in the late 90s, all the Christian fiction authors who were published were white. I discovered Victoria Christopher Murray, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the kind of story I want to tell. I discovered Jacqueline Thomas, and I was like, this is what I want to write. I saw myself on the show, and it was like, okay, so now I see myself, and therefore I can write this type of stories. So with that said, I want to jump right back over to Joanna, because I want to talk about this fantasy genre and these witches, and go for it. Tell us a little about that, and how even how the genre that you write within, the diversity of what you write, how it helps us, I think, see possibility, how it stretches the imagination and the breadth of us as a people when we see these types of stories.
So I will say I am an old head. I'm like Marvel phase 1. Like I can tell you all those characters and how they relate. They're going into phase 4. It's getting a little out of my realm. But I always, like from the first time I saw Storm in a comic book and then saw her brought to life. Now, if you follow comics or fantasy, sci-fi kind of thing, Storm is a dark-skinned woman with all gray hair from Africa. And when Marvel decided to bring her to the screen, they selected a light-skinned Black woman. And I just remember feeling disappointed. I mean, first I was happy that the Black woman had a job, so don't get me wrong, but I just felt disappointed that she wasn't true to how she was characterized and drawn. And so just started paying attention to the books that I was reading. I love sci-fi, I love speculative fiction, but we are pretty absent, or had been pretty absent, unless we were the boogeyman, the hoodoo witch, the voodoo witch. And I wanted to spin that because, first off, there's a difference between hoodoo and voodoo. So don't let the media confuse you. And a lot of these religions were brought over. And so hoodoo is a very natural thing. They practice natural healing, herbs, all the things. And so it's rooted here in Charleston and the Gullah Geechee community. It's a real practice. And so I wanted to bring witches, Black witches, to the forefront, who weren't scary, who weren't evil, who weren't trying to, do all these horrible things. And my witches are like saving the world. But they're also grappling with their relationships with their parents. My millennial witch, she is a young gifted witch who is trying to figure out if she wants to follow the family legacy or if she wants to just go be a regular witch and do her own thing. Like, they're having real life issues, but also it's centered in their Blackness. Like, I don't beat you over the head with this witch is Black. You just know based on what she looks like, how she eats, going to church with her grandmother, all the things that are part of our culture and our lives. Not that other people don't do that, but this is specific to my family, my people, and how we have come together as a family, how we come together as a family. And so I really wanted to show that witches are not bad. It's how you, yes, there are some bad witches in my books, but you need it for drama. But just understanding that who we are, it's just another look at who we are. And when I read Harry Potter and saw all the movies, I was, yay, thumbs up for Dean, but
right,
there were Black people in the UK, like, and so, but I can't take issue with her because that's her world. And so, but I made it, I was intentional about writing my world and the world that I wanted to see. And oh, by the way, there are other folks, other minorities, other folks from the majority that show up in my books. But when you read my book, you know instinctively that this is about a young Black witch and her family. Like, family is always a key element in the stories that I write because that's how I was raised. So my family's important to me. And I want people to understand that you can tell your story any way you want. So
I love it. Okay, and with respect to that, talking about how you wanted a world that you wrote about a world that you wanted to see, and I applaud you for that. It's awesome. I think that we all kind of do that. We write about what we want to read. And with that said, I want to throw this question to Preslesa, and I'm just curious for you to share how easy or difficult was it for you to, from maybe even from a marketing standpoint, Preslesa, to promote a book that includes a biracial main character? I mean, you see, you're bringing in, you've got she's an Afro-Filipino. So talk to us a little bit about that.
This is a great question, Rhonda. I'll have to circle or give a little timeline to this. When I was pitching this book, maybe about in 2017 and 2018, I remember meeting with editors from different publishing houses. And many of those publishing houses had majority white authors and target readerships. And I remember the editors, when I would pitch this story to them, one of the first things they asked me was, where do you see yourself on the shelf? And for me, that was code language for, I don't know where to put you or where to put this story. Because if you can't see it I already see it because I'm coming here with the pitch. I already have the vision. If you can't envision it, like how to market it and push it, then you can't see it. And so you're probably not going to connect with it the way that I'm already connected to the story. But that was like a question that came to me a lot when I would be pitching my books. Where do you see yourself on the shelf? You know, they couldn't, to me, that was, I don't know where to put you. And so for me, I'm traditionally published. And so for me, the key was to partner with a publisher who could see it, a publisher who had a more expansive outlook on who to reach, a publisher that had like a more progressive and inclusive type of viewpoint on the types of romances that can be published and the types of readerships that could be reached. And so once I found the right publisher for the book, then the marketing power behind it wasn't a problem at all. I think that if I would have published with a publisher that didn't see it, didn't have that vision, then I wouldn't have had the marketing support that I had with this book. So I think it's all about, you know, yes, authors, you know, some authors want to be traditionally published and the dream is to be traditionally published, but you also have to ask yourself as an author, is this the right publisher for me? Will they give me that marketing support that I need? Can they see a Black and Filipino main character being read in the mainstream and being accepted and celebrated in the mainstream, in the wider readership, in the wider romance genre and market? And so, you know, if I come with my vision and the publisher sees it too, then it's great. But if it's not there, if they're not fully connected, then I don't think I would have gotten that push. So I think it's the team that you partner with. You got to partner with people who can support you and who can see what you see, what you already see.
Okay, that's a great answer. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts around that? Okay, so I have a question. You know, in the last 100 years, certainly in the last 50 years, traditional publishing has done an amazing job at segmenting books by genre. Okay, and we understand the importance of genre. It kind of, you know, lets the reader know what the experience is going to be for them. But I think when I think about Black storytelling, I think about how, like, we don't need the separation. Like, we need all the things, we need all the stories. And even separating by fiction, nonfiction, you know, creates like paths that the reader takes in the bookstore, in the library, that takes them away from other stories. And of course, I understand, I work in the library, I work in the bookstore, you got to classify books. But when I think about that separation or that segmentation, I think that sometimes I wonder how that affects the ability for us as a people to get the full breadth of literature, to not fall into those traps of I only read romance and I only read romance by these 10 authors, or only read, you know, nonfiction by these authors, you know, or only read Christian books or whatever, when there's just so much more that we have to share. And so I'd like to ask you, Cleo, what would you say to a reader who traditionally maybe reads a lot of fiction? What do you say to them about what you have to share in your books that would tickle their, you know, delight their imagination, that would take them to another place and give them that same, you know, exciting reader experience? Because your books sound extremely exciting. I'm like 2 seconds from clicking and finding out what you got going on.
Oh, you know, I'm always listening to people say, I hate history. Oh, history is so boring. And so that's why, you know, I'm like, okay, I got something where you can learn history by accident. So this is like a story, just like a fiction story. And you start from point A and you end up at point B, and you have this nice little journey with all these people you get to know. And And at the end, you will have learned all this history, and you will understand that everything that happens today is connected by a thread that goes all the way back to when we got here and on the other side. And so it is hard getting people to try something new. But I think kind of like by me making a historical account read like a fiction book, that made it easier for people to cross that bridge. So I hope that answered the question.
I think that did. That actually was a great answer to the question. And it makes me want to buy the book even more because like you just sold it. So with that said, I'm going to pop over to Samuel and just ask him to chime in on the same thing, since he also writes nonfiction and a little history there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the other author said, I mean, it's so important to kind of get out of your head when you think about what type of books you like to read. I know when I wrote my books, I didn't have a good grasp on genre, type, all of those things. I had a story that I wanted to share and I just wrote it. So I independently published my first books, and it was really just that. Like I felt like I had something to say and I wanted to get it out. And then I wanted to share it with other people. So I think there's probably an author for every type of palette that's out there. And I think that's what's so great about, just us as people. We're so creative with it, whether it's, getting history through a nonfiction or reading the Bible through a comic book. There are so many different ways that you can get these stories and this information. It's really about you opening your mind and considering that maybe there is something out there. When you look at, the Kwame Alexanders of the world, like who thought about writing books through poetry? I mean, he was probably one of the first ones that I've noticed that did, that doing it that way, that urban drama, urban, setting, he's probably the first one that really popularized it for me. And you have, your Jason Reynolds out there, that gritty, again, urban tale. Like there are so many different ways that you can tell a story, and depending on what your flavor is, there is an author for you. There is a genre for you. And I think once you realize that, just like, bread on a shelf, there is something for everybody. You just have to get out and try a few.
You mentioned Kwame Alexander, and my son, who is a non-reader, it is what it is, disappointing to me. But so I have to hunt up, books for him. And I have to say the first book that I ever saw him reading in bed without me having said it's time to read was it was one of Kwame's books, and I can't remember which one. It wasn't the crossover, the one before it. Fell in love with it. Fell in love with a book that I was like, this is poetry. Oh my gosh. Like because I didn't even look at the inside of it when I pulled it off the shelf for him. So I'd like to lead in with one more question here. Well, not one more question, but what stories do you think will be told? What stories will we be telling in fiction and nonfiction about the pandemic? And as a writer, how do you feel? Are you ready to write those stories? Are you ready to tell those stories? Savannah shaking her head no. But these are our stories. Somebody's got to document. Somebody's got to tell the story now, y'all. So Savannah, tell us your thoughts around.
I write romance. We've already had the lover and the coronavirus. We've already done it, and it was just like, oh my God, it's too soon. But it's hard is balancing what the pandemic has. Well, we already knew, right? But it exposed it, brought it out to the light like cockroaches, just how unequal we are, how by a thread most of us are making it day to day. And that is a story that definitely needs to be told. That is a story that needs to be documented. That is a story that has really enraged me as I continue to watch it unfold, as I, have had friends and friends of friends and family members of friends just succumb to this virus and have had the virus, and it's been difficult. So, on one hand, and this is something that the romance community in particular has definitely been struggling with. So there's several camps. One big one is like, oh, we're just not gonna talk about it. It's a romance, this fantasy. We're giving them an escape anyway. And we have the others who are like, well, we've got to address it because it's gonna be like a big gaping, what is going on that you're just not gonna mention this. I don't know where I fall on that. I do know that it's going to be, especially because I write about Black women, that is just something that I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to address it. But, address it with truth and address it with nuance and address it with authenticity and care, because I can't just say, oh, it was a thing that happened, we're not going to talk about it, or, oh, was it? Because it changed the direction of how we are going forth as a society, and hopefully that means that has changed. We're no longer going to pretend that things are not as dire as it is, or not as precarious as it is for a whole lot of people, in particular, African people of African descent and other folks who are underrepresented in major areas of society. So I don't know if I answered that right or if I answered that fully, but I do know that it's something that I personally still have to metabolize on how do I want to address it, because I do think we need to. To me, it's a responsibility to do so.
Eventually it will be. I think that, television is doing a great job with it, clearly. Those storytellers are doing a great job with these scripts, and so I think we'll eventually get to it with fiction. I know that there are a lot of bloggers who are doing an amazing job blogging and chronicling, a lot of the stories. And a lot of it is still painful because it's still fresh, It's still fresh. I think we'll eventually get to it. Before we go, I know we always have a lot of people on these types of panels, or at least some, and we hope that we have many, who are interested in becoming writers themselves. And so I'd like for each of you, and we'll start with Samuel, to share what your thoughts are about whether publishing books or writing books is, a good career path for Black people.
So I'm going to say that I think any career is a great career for Black people. We need to be in every space, filling up every corner of the room. So I don't think there's such thing as a, good space. We deserve every space, first and foremost. Secondly, I can't give a personal account of whether or not it's a good career for you, because I didn't choose it as a career. I just know that Black voices are needed. I know that they are important. I know that there are not enough of them. And I think that as long as, the earth goes on, we need people accounting our stories. So we need more writers. We need more authors. We need more people dedicating themselves to this craft. We need more excellence being shown. We need more examples. So for that reason, I will say that it's a great career. And I hope that we inspire more authors, whether they're, published, through a national, platform, or whether it's through a blog, or whether it's through a podcast, or, independently published, whatever it is, whatever the medium is, if you have something to say, which everyone does, I hope that you would pick up the pen or a microphone, or whatever your medium is, but we need your voice and we need your perspective. And I don't think that could be stated enough. But yeah, I think it's a great career for anybody that wants to take up that endeavor.
Okay. Congressman John Lewis said the movement without storytelling is like a bird without wings, and we're always in a movement, So I agree that the power of story for us is it's critical, it's essential, it's, absolute necessary. And we've talked a lot about, traditional publishing. And I'd like for Duana and Savannah, we'll start with Savannah, just kind of chime in on your thoughts about being self-published, and for the viewer who is here and is thinking that they want to get their work out and they don't want to go the traditional route, they don't want to go the long way. What has that experience been like with you, and what's the one piece of advice you would offer in that space?
So I think what I would say is to always be willing to learn. And honestly, that's something you would have to do whether you're independently published or traditionally published. Being willing to learn, being willing to try new things, and what Cleo said at the top of this panel, talking to people, meeting with people, that was something I had to learn the hard way, because I was and still am a little shy. I don't like putting myself out there very much, but you have to, because think about what you're doing. You're publishing, you are putting yourself out there to strangers who don't know you, and you're asking them to come with you on a journey for however many pages. You're asking them for their time, not even their money. I mean, that's whatever. They can get more money, they can't get more time. And they chose your book and your story and your journey and to follow your voice. And so what I would just say is to have confidence that you have the right to say what you're about to say. You have the right to share what you're about to share. And you should, again, just be willing to learn from other people, no matter who they are, no matter how, veteran or brand spanking new they are to the space. There, you are learning something from somebody at all times. And I promise you, once you do that, once you synthesize that, this will be a great experience for you to have. And to know that just because you choose to be independently published does not mean that you cannot also be traditionally published with another project, because not every project is meant for traditional publishing and not every project is meant for independent publishing. So learning those two differences will definitely serve you as you go forth.
Duana, before you move on to that, I kind of, with what Savannah said, I pivoted my question for you. You can share your thoughts about that, but I also want you to tell us about what you see in the future. In 25 years from now, what do you want the Black bookshelf to look like?
So Afrofuturism, also known as Black speculative fiction. And if you've read any of Nnedi Okorafor, I always mess up her last name, but I love her. She is specifically African futurism. I think there will be more Black stories in this space because folks, it's been happening. N.K. Jemisin, I mean, Octavia Butler, like I could go down, we could be here all day and I can give you guys some great recommendations. But I think traditionally for me, a lot of Black literature has either been the struggle narrative or slave narrative or the girlfriend narrative. And you weren't seeing us, like the romance leads until, last 15, 20 years. And I got tired of reading about all the hardships that we were having, and I wanted adventure as an adult. And so I think we will see more characters, Black characters, and especially Black girls and women in these adventurous roles. I'm hoping, and if we don't, I'll be sitting here writing them. And so that's something I'm very excited about. But also, just as Savannah said, being an indie published writer, you can make a great living. It's a great career, but you also have to be willing to put yourself out there. People can't read the story they don't know about. And so you have to learn to market. And that's something that I am really working on, is marketing more. The more I talk about what I write, the more interested people are. And then I see this correlation between a little bump in sales after I've done something like this. And it's like, oh, light bulb moment. I need to be telling people that I write these stories. And so now they have another alternative to go and find some. So as an indie writer, you've got to get past your fear of marketing and your introversion, because I too am very introverted, less shy, but very introverted. But the stories are out there, and there's a lot out there. Traditional is coming along, but if you want to know what's really happening, go peruse the indie list, all of them. And I guarantee you, in every single genre, you will find something that you're interested in reading. And so I think taking away the stigma of indie and just go find a good book and read it. That's what I'd like to see folks doing in the next 5 years, but also seeing more Black women as these adventurous sci-fi fantasy leads.
Just doing the doggone thing. You know, when I think about books that I've bought for myself, like Legendborn and Gilded Ones, you know, these young, look, amazing stories. So, you know, the younger authors, I'm 55, some of these younger authors are getting it done, and they're doing exactly what you're talking about, Dewana, putting us in different stories in different spaces, exciting places, I think, for the reader. And I'm excited about the future of that and what that looks like. Because if traditional publishers are picking it up, you know, and indie authors have been doing it, I mean, I expect there to be an explosion in those type of books over the next 25 years, because the readers are buying them. They're tapping the bestseller list. It's happening. So with that said, we're coming to the very end of our time here. So we do have a question from our viewer, a viewer that wants to know about promotion. How many of us network with book clubs to promote our books? I guess I can answer that. For me, book clubs have always been the backbone of my readership, or they initially were. I was traditionally published, and that was kind of a focus of my publisher, to find book clubs. But I always kind of had the attitude that I sought out the individual reader, because within every individual, book clubs have individual readers. And so it was just kind of always my mission to get the individual readers, and the book clubs would come. But I'm going to let someone else. Press Lacey, you are popping out there with this great brand new book. Share your thoughts about book clubs.
I am actually just getting into the book club space, so I am very new to it. And actually, my first foray into the book club space is through the Christian Book Lovers Retreat. When I first went there a couple years ago, that is like a place that has many, many book clubs, many readers from different book clubs who come together to read Black Christian fiction. And that's where I first became connected with my target readership. I was like, oh my gosh, my target readership. Everyone says, where's your target reader? And I found them all right at the Christian Book Lovers Retreat many years ago. Like Rhonda, I am also like a very personable type individual when it comes to marketing. I like to make that personal connection, whether it's a social media comment, responding to a social media comment. Even right now, I'm write handwritten notes to some of my subscribers, following up with people on email. I'm very personable in my marketing. I like to do what they call warm marketing. And then as someone gets to know me, then if I have a new book out, they're like, oh, let me try that book, because they already know me. So So that's a slow form of marketing. And so, but that's my style. And so I like to reach the individual reader and then keep my fingers crossed that that reader is connected to a book club. There is a group that I just joined called the Novel Network. That is a place where traditionally published authors can join, and they will be connected to a network of book clubs around the country and set up virtual meetings. It's called novelnetwork.com. So if you ever want to look into that, that's something where you can also reach book clubs.
We have one final question before we make our final comments. What indie websites would you recommend? And I think that was you, Luana, that mentioned the indie websites.
So I spend a lot of time perusing the bestsellers list on Kindle. So a lot of the indie authors, Kindle is an easy entry into publishing, self-publishing. And so I peruse those lists, but also pay attention to what the writers you follow. Go see who they follow and check out what other folks are writing. So a lot of social media, there are a lot of online that make recommendations. I don't necessarily follow the blogs per se, but I'm always in somebody's Instagram, like looking and seeing which recommendations. The Bookstagram and the YouTubers, you will get some great recommendations that are typically not the beaten path. So
that's a great recommendation. Okay, so let's close out with this question. And I always like to encourage young people. To the panelists, I would love to share just one piece of advice, inspiration, comment for our younger generation of writers who want to be storytellers. What do you have to say to them? And I'm going to start with Preslesa.
To new writers coming up, I would say stay true to yourself and your story. Hold your ground in what you believe in. Hold firm to your convictions. It's going to be a tough path, but if you keep going and if you don't give up, then you will get to where you want to go.
Love it. Okay, Samuel.
So my advice to young people who are interested in getting into the field is that just to jump out there and do it. I know a lot of times we like to think about what our voice sounds like. I find it best that it's easy to hone your voice if you're actually doing it. So write some more, and through practice, you'll find that sweet spot and go for it.
Okay. Savannah, do we have you?
Read. You got to read too. It is right, but you do need to write. Nothing to read if you don't have anything to write, but you should read. And try to read outside of your comfort zone, because you never know where you'll find your inspiration. But reading, particularly in your genre, to help figure out what the rules are, but also outside of your genre to just give you a bigger breadth of experience and knowledge to draw from as you craft your own stories.
I agree 100%. Reading outside of your genre, I think has always made me more creative as a writer, instead of just, reading within my genre. Okay, and so next I'm going to ask Cleo.
Savannah took my recommendation. I would say I was also going to say reading. Reading is critical. You don't know what good writing sounds like until you read good writing. And once you read good writing, when you read your own back, you're like, oh, that doesn't flow. So, and read what you write out loud. It's different. when you read it out loud to yourself. And so that's my suggestion. Read a lot, learn about a lot of different things. Don't be narrow, and because the more you know, the better your writing will be, because you'll have many different perspectives. So your writing will be richer and not so narrow in focus. So, and the last thing is discipline. Writing isn't like going to a job where you have to be there at a certain time. You'll never get a book done if you have no self-discipline. So you're going to have to set aside specific times to write, as if you're going to a class at college. I'm going to write every Monday night from 7 till 8 or something like that. You're going to have to create discipline for yourself to get your projects done.
Okay, so I don't know what you're gonna say, Duana, because Cleo just brought a whole lot home, but let's hear your thoughts on that.
That's it. Put your butt in the chair, write. Don't expect perfection. Keep writing, and read everything you can get your hands on.
I will also add movies. Anything that tells stories, pay attention to. So movies, because they do very well with structured storytelling, and also dramas, sitcoms, anything that tells a story, because you're going to draw all that inspiration on how you're going to craft your own stories. So, we stay outside of your genre, but even outside of your medium is also good to learn how to craft a story.
I agree 100%. I'm a big TV watcher, and I think that I get a lot of just ideas and inspiration from watching dramas. Great dialogue. I mean, but the dialogue on television is amazing. So definitely, I would say my thought is just to be true to your vision, your story. Do not allow what other people are doing, what other people are writing, how much somebody else is selling, or your picture to feel like you could sell that much. Don't let that competitiveness get in your head and in your heart and your spirit, because it will kill your creativity. Just be true to what you want to write. All of the advice that everyone has shared here, every single word is critical to being successful as a writer. No one has said anything here that you didn't need to hear. But I will tell you, from my perspective, it was just believing in yourself, believing that somebody wants to read what you have to write. I don't care if it's one person or if it's 1 million people. It's still an important story, and it's still going to have an impact on someone's life. Story is life-changing. Story impacts behavior. It impacts what we believe about ourselves, what we believe for our children and our communities. So believe in the story that God put in your heart, because I believe that, that's where it comes from. There are stories that He wants out there. And so trust in your voice, trust in your vision. And like we said, get your butt in the chair and write. So with that said, I think that unless somebody has a final comment, I think we can wrap this up. I really appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. This was an insightful panel for me. I told a friend I'm excited to see what people have to say, to share about efficacy in Black storytelling. So thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your comments and your thoughts, and sharing and caring enough about the community to make time for this during this happy Juneteenth week. I'm excited about the potential for what the viewers who have joined us, how they can see themselves in Black storytelling, how they see themselves in Black storytelling, and really just how gifted we are, how much we have inherited from our ancestors who endured all the way through to Juneteenth, from the announcement of the Emancipation Proclamation all the way to Juneteenth. They've given us just a rich legacy of strength and power for us to walk in. So with that said, everybody have a great week.
You too. Thank you.
Black history is my history at Avery Research Center.
Learn more about your Black history at the Avery Research Center, opening soon.
Low Country, the Juneteenth festival celebrating Black excellence is here June 14th through the 20th. Saturday, June 19th, it's Tony, Raheem Devon, Lacey, Lebrato, and more now at the Jenkins Institute. Go to lowcountryjuneteenthweek.com or follow us at Low Country Juneteenth Week.